Chapter 2: The Investor and Inflation. Inflation and the fight against it has been very much in the public mind in the recent year. The shrinkage in the purchasing power of the dollar in the past, and particularly of the fear or hope by speculators of a serious further decline in the future, has greatly influenced the thinking of Wall Street. It is clear that those with a fixed dollar income will suffer when the cost of living expands, and the same applies to a fixed amount of dollar price principal. Holder of a stock, on the other hand, have the possibility that the loss of the dollar purchasing power may be offset by bands in their dividends and the price of their shares. On the basis of these undeniable facts about financial authorities, have concluded that number one, bonds are inherently a desirable form of investment, and two, consequently, common stock are by their very nature more desirably investment than bonds. We have heard of charitable institution being advised of their portable consists 100% of the stock and 0% of bond. This is quite a reversal from an early day when trust investment were restricted by law to high-grade bonds and a few choice preferred stock. Our reader must have enough intelligence to recognize that even high-quality stock cannot be a better purchase than bond under all conditions. I.e., regardless of how high the stock market may be and how low the current dividends return compared with the rate available on bonds. A statement of this kind would be as absurd as was the controversy one too often heard many years ago, that a bond is safer than any stock. In this chapter, we shall try to apply various measurement to the inflation factor in order to reach some conclusion as to the extent to which the investor may wisely be influenced by the expectation regarding future rise in the price level. In this chapter, we shall try, in order to reach some conclusion as to the extent to which the investor may be wisely be influenced by expectation regarding future rise in the price level. rise in the price. And it's a matter, as in so many other in finance, we must base our view of future policy on our knowledge of past experiments. Is inflation something new for this country? At least in the very serious form it has taken since 1965. If we have seen comparable or worse inflation in a living experiment, what lesson could be learned in serious form it had taken since 1965? And we have seen comparable or worse inflation in living experiments. What lesson can be learned from them in confronting the inflation of today? Let us start with Table 2 to 1. A condensed historical tabulation that contains much information about change in the general price level and continued change will begin with the 1915 and thus cover 55 years presented at 5-year interval. We used 1946 instead of 1945 to avoid the last year of the wartime price control. The first thing we noted is that we have had inflation in the past, lots of it. The largest 5-year dose was between 1915 and 1920, when the cost of living nearly double. This compared with advance of 15% between 1965 and 1970. In the between, we have had 3 periods of decline price and then 6 of advantage at varying rates, some rather small. On this showing, the investor should clearly allow for the probability of continuing or recurrent. So, to inflation to come. Can we tell that the rate of inflation is likely to be? No, clear answer is suggested by our table, and it shows variation of all sorts. It would seem sensible, however, to take the cue from the rather consistent record of the past 20 years. The average annual rise in the consumer price level for this period had been 2.5%, that for 1965 to 1970 was 4.5% for the 1970 alone was 5.4%. So this is chart 2.21, table 221. You could actually pause the video and take a look at it. The official government's policy have been strongly against large-scale inflation, and there are some reason to believe in federal policy will be more effective in the future than in the recent year. We think it would be reasonable for an investor at this point to base his thinking and decision on a probable, far from certain rate of future inflation of say 3% per annum. This is compared with an annual rate of about 2 and 1, about 2.1% or 2.5% of the entire period 1915 to 1970. What would be an implication of such an advance? It would eat up in higher living costs, about 1/2 the income now obtainable good medium-term tax-free bonds, or our assumed after-tax equivalents from high-grade comparative bond. This would be serious shrinkage, but it should not be exaggeration. It would not mean the true value or the purchasing power of the investor fortune need to be reduced over the years. What would be an inflation of such advance? It would eat up in higher. But the next question naturally is, can the investor be a reasonable sure of doing better by buying and holding other things than high grade bonds? Even at an predicted rate of return offered in 1970 to 1971, would not, for example, for all stock program be preferable to be part bonds, part stock programs? Um, really? Building protection against inflation, and they are not almost certain to give a better return over the year than will bond. Have not in effect stocks treated the investor for better than have bond over the 55 years period of our study. The answer to these questions is somewhat complicated. Common stock have indeed done better than bond over a long period of time in the past. The rise of the DJIA from an average of 77 in 1915 to an average of 753 in 1970 work out an annual compound rate at just 4%, to which we may add another 4% for an average divided return. The cost per rating figures for this S&P composite are about the same. These combined figure of 8% per year, of course, much better, more better than the return enjoyed from the bond over the same 55 years period. But they do not exceed it the now offered by a high grade bond. This brings us to the next logical question. Is there a persuasive reason to believe that common stock are likely to do much better in the future years than they have in the last 5.5 decades? Our answer to this crucial question must be a flat no. Common stock may do better in the future than in the past, but they're far from certain to do so. So we must deal here with two different time invest elements in the invest result. The first cover what is likely to occur over the long term future, say the next 25 years. 25 year. The second applies to what is likely to happen to the investor. The second applied likely to happen to the investor both financially and psychologically over a short or interminated period. Say 5. Wait a minute. The second applies to what is likely to happen to the investor, both financially and psychologically, over short or intermediate periods, say 5 years or less. His frame and with what he has done above all his decision what to do. Of the lifetime investment, but rather by its experiment from years to years. On this point, we can be reliable. There's no close time confliction between the inflator